So welcome everybody to Discovering Buddhism. Actually, I said last week this is Discovering Buddhism Module 2, but I lied. This is Module 3. I forgot how to meditate in the middle there. So far, in the grand scheme of things, we've looked at the mind and its potential as Module 1. Discovering Buddhism Module 2 was how to meditate. And here we are with 3, which is presenting the path. The path being basically minds. A path is a mind in Buddhism that leads us from the polluted, sticky, projecting minds, wrong views, wrong minds, to more enlightened minds until we get all the way up to enlightenment itself, which all these wonderful minds kind of realize their full potential with all the afflictions and their seeds and all obscurations of the mind completely removed. That's where we're heading to with a path, but it's a path in a sense that takes you from here to there still, right? Welcome, Anne. I'm just going to mute you because, yeah. Because, especially when we're talking about the Lam Rim, which is this series of steps, it's a very useful system. You go from grade 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, etc., all the way up to enlightenment. So it's a very easily accessible method to follow the teachings of the Lam Rim. You get all the important points of the path in a series of steps that are really easy to understand, and it shows that there's no contradictions in any of the Buddha's teachings because you see how they're all linked together. So there's lots of really special reasons why the Lam Rim was a fantastic system. It was created by Lama Atisha in about 1000 AD, somewhere like that. Not really good with the dates. So as usual, then let's start with a motivation meditation to begin. And this is just a very brief way to bring the mind to somewhere positive so that the positive karma that we do will be as beneficial as possible, kind of squeezing out the most we can possibly get out of this hour and a bit together. So it's up to you if you want to go into a formal posture or close your eyes or keep your eyes open. But the important thing is just to think along these points. And if we're just exploring these topics as, from another religion or from no religion, that's great. You just don't have to take any of these ideas as true. You just take them as interesting hypotheses and explore them together. That's all we're doing here. If we're a Buddhist, then we might take them in a different way. But it's up to you. I'm just explaining it from the Buddhist point of view, and then you take them however is useful for you. So refuge and bodhicitta are these two minds that are very commonly generated at the beginning of Buddhist teachings. Refuge is the mind that understands the difficulties of being human for us, and the difficulties that involves, which is, being pulled and pushed around by afflictions, anxiety, depression, anger, jealousy, grasping, unsatisfactory nature of, this kind of underlying undercurrent of dissatisfaction. We can never kind of get a grasp on real happiness. The afflictions of the cause can't let us be happy. And if we're fortunate to be in a well-off country like we are here in the UK, I think we're in the UK, aren't we? We're in the UK, then most of the grosser problems for us are going to be about the afflictions, not so much about where we're going to find our next meal from or having to worry about where shelter's coming from, which is what affects other humans and animals around the planet. So understanding that nature of our human existence and the wish to be free from it, we turn towards the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, these three jewels, as a way to liberate ourselves from that suffering, that pain, and that anxiety. The unenlightened being's anxiety. And then the last two lines in this first verse here are then to think, well, it's not just myself who wants to be liberated from all the suffering, but what about all my dear sentient beings who I share this planet with, share the universe with? What about them? Can I not include them? And you can. The best way would be to become a Buddha yourself, because then you're fully qualified. You understand all the points of the path, and you can help others to liberate them too. that's quite a brave mind, the second step there. So we're just going to recite this verse twice in Tibetan, and then once in English. You can choose to follow along if you like. Sangye chedang saki chonam la jancho badu dani kapsuchi dagi chenyang gi besenam gi jala penche sangye parasho Sangye chedang saki chonam la jancho badu dani kapsuchi Dagi chenyang gi personam gi jala penche sangye de parasho. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Okay, thank you. Okay, so launching into this week's topic then, just to recap here what the course outline is for these 6 weeks. If you just joined us today, that's great. Don't worry about it. Today's a good session to join us because we're going to start looking at the path in detail. The last 2 weeks were just preparation in some sense. We looked at the Buddha, his life, and the lineage, how we got the Buddha's teachings from then till now. And then what this Lam Rim is all about. I keep mentioning Lam Rim, steps on the path. That's the translation, Lam Rim. And where that comes from, the master Atisha was an Indian Buddhist master who then went to Tibet and wrote this to the Tibetans, and then inspired a whole lineage of, or a whole tradition of these steps in the path, graded steps in the path to enlightenment teachings. And then we looked at the outline of the whole path. And then we're going to look at some of the actual first steps here in week 3, which is the preliminaries, and then the small scope. Next week will be middle scope. The week after that, the great scope. There's only 3 scopes. And then the week 6 is how Tantra fits into that. It was also Buddhist teachings. And then a summary. Yeah. So that's where we are with this week, week 3. Keep coming back to this quote here from the Buddha himself. Abandon negative actions. Create perfect virtue. Subdue your own mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So it's Buddha himself. I put here 400 BC, 500 BCE, but actually it's probably a bit earlier than that. It's about 500. Does anyone know? 563 or something. I forget. I'm useless with dates and history and all that. I'll put it in another slide somewhere else, but not this one. Anyway, that's going to be quite important actually in today's teaching because abandoning negative actions is not just because, the Buddha said so, or because we want a reward, or because we want to be a perfect Buddhist and do well in our exams. It's to do with karma, right? Karma is action, and the results of karma depend on how the action was created. So if we created the action in the influence of something harmful, then the result is going to be harmful. It's quite a direct correlation between how we create actions and the experience we get at the end. So it's in our own interests. This is like learning the formula, learning physics. We don't ask, Einstein, we don't follow the laws of physics in the sense that, he said we have to do it like this. It's just that's how it was. He just discovered something that was already there. It's the same with karma. The Buddha didn't create karma. We're not doing it just to please him, but because he said so. It's a system that's already there in place. And the Buddha found that when he became enlightened, and he's explaining it to us, and whether we believe it or not is up to us. But he's saying, try it as a system and see. So that's what we're saying here is the teaching of the Buddha. Create perfect virtue. Virtue might not be the right word, but just create positive actions, and then you get positive results. Quite straightforward. Subdue your own mind. You have to do your own first before everyone else's. Yeah, we always forget that. I always forget that. We always like to help. Dive in and help, but sometimes we don't know what we're doing. So we really have to understand what it is we're trying to achieve, what it is exactly we're dealing with spiritual practice before we can really help others. Hence why becoming a Buddha would be better in the long run for others. Yeah. So let's bear that in mind as we go through that quote from the Buddha. So here's an outline of the entire Lam Rim. in summary, preliminary meditations, which I spelled wrong, small scope, middle, I want to use a proofreader. If someone wants to volunteer as my proofreader, I'd be very happy. Small scope, middle scope, and great scope. And we're going to look at today the first couple of those. Each of these scopes is generated, kind of generates an aspiration, what the person wants to attain, and then how to actually do that. So as I mentioned before, the Buddha isn't just going to assume that we want to work for future lives happiness. He's going to show us how. And that's the whole point of the small scope, which we're going to look at today. Because we don't even think about future lives, do we? That's going to be our discussion point today, about past and future lives. We don't tend to think, do we, that partly culturally, because it's not in our culture, the theistic traditions don't really talk about past and future lives, although they do, Christianity and etc. do talk about going to heaven or hell, right? So there is something after death. But, you know, if we talk to a materialist, or most of them would say that, you know, at death, that's it. There is nothing else. You just cease, right? So it's not the Buddha's view, what the Buddha found. So we have to kind of just take that as a hypothesis. That's what the Buddha found. And to accept that is quite difficult for us. So we shouldn't just accept it because he said it or anybody else says it. We just take it as an idea that the Buddha found, and then we explore it for ourselves, right? So, but that's going to become it's going to be a theme throughout the whole of this scope, because the whole aspiration of the small scope being is to work for next life, which we're going to see at the end, right? And why that's important, we're going to look at today. But the Buddha doesn't assume that you want that already, because mostly we don't. We don't think about it, as I was saying. That was my point. So to come back to that, how we generate the wish to think about future lives is we have to go through a series of meditations, part one. And then part two is how we actually do it, how we actually get to have happy human life, next life. Yep. So let's look at that in detail. Small scope, as I said there, is to gain a precious human life, next life. And that's important because, you know, the spiritual path is going to take a little while, right? If you haven't figured it out by now, it's going to take a bit of time. Well, I was my birthday last week, so I'm 44 now. And it only seems like yesterday I was like 24 or something. Because suddenly somehow I lost 20 years somewhere, and it seems to speed up as you get older. And time's passing by, and I don't have a realization yet. I don't have wisdom, realizing emptiness. Don't have bodhicitta. I barely think about next life. So it's very clear, you know, that it's going to take a bit of time, and it's going to take more than one life, right? So if the Buddha had explained, I've often thought about this, if the Buddha explained all this, and I've studied, you know, I'm not a geshe or anything, but I've studied a fair bit, you know, and I've studied all the different points of the basic program, what have you. And there's quite a lot in there, and it only dawns on you that this is quite a lot to do. You probably already know this, right? There's quite a lot to do, spiritually speaking, to become enlightened. So if the Buddha explained all this and there's only one life, you'd be like, you know, what was the point? You might as well just kept quiet, because I'm not going to be able to do it in one life. So it's kind of like, it kind of slowly dawns on you that actually there is future lives, because the Buddha wouldn't, I trust the Buddha completely, and he wouldn't have explained all this, you know, if it wasn't possible over many lives. So therefore, the implication then for me is that actually there must be something more after this, because I need, you know, to progress on a series of future lives. I can't just do it in one. Anyway, that's just my explanation of how I've come to it. You have to find it in your own way. And we need a precious human rebirth next to continue, as I say, because you're not going to get it all in one life. If anybody tells you you can become enlightened in one life just by following them, you should probably stay away from them, to be honest. You know, it's going to take a little while. Unless you've already got bodhicitta, unless you've already got the wisdom realizing emptiness, in which case you can practice Tantra and be enlightened in one life. But if you haven't got those yet, it's going to take a few lives. Yeah. So next life, you know, whether we have a human life or not next life, to continue the spiritual path depends on actions and the actions we do in this life. So the first step is to be able to get a series of those to continue. So this is what I mean by it starts at the very beginning, grade 1. At least get a series of these so you can have a basis to continue a spiritual path. The middle scope then's aspiration is to become completely liberated from all of that forever. And then the great scope is to be enlightened for all sentient beings. So we're going to come back to some of those as we go through these 3 scopes. So here are the first 3 that we're going to look at today. Preliminary meditations, how to listen and explain to teachings, explain the teachings, how to rely correctly on spiritual teachers, and precious human rebirth. Those are all kind of, before we get to the small scope, those are important meditations we need to think about. So here's the first one, how to listen. Actually, the full outline in the Lamrim text is how to listen to and explain, but we're not be doing much explaining, we're just going to be listening. So I'll just put how to listen really. But the same applies if you were teaching it as listening to it, right? So there's 2 methods here to kind of prepare the mind for this. One is abandoning 3 faults of a vessel, which is what I'm going to look at today, and then relying on the 6 ideas, but I won't cover that one today. If you want to look at in more detail, you can have a look in the Lamrim texts. I think I have sent out already the Lamrim outlines. I'll put that again in Slack channel, or if you want that, just put it in the chat and I'll send it to you by email. So here's the first one then. 3 faults of a vessel which we have to abandon. Here's my vessel. It's a nice singing bowl, actually. So the 3 faults to abandon are being upside down, or even if you're not upside down, you're held the right way up, being dirty, or if you're not dirty and you're still the right way up, you have a leak. Does that make sense? So there's the 3 faults that we're going to abandon. That's the analogy, right? So let's say that it's raining outside. Can you imagine it raining outside? Don't have to imagine very much, do we, these days, let's face it. But let's say it's raining outside, and what you're wanting to do here is you're wanting to contain the water. You wanted to contain the teachings as they're being given to you. This is the analogy, right? So the water's pouring down, but if the bowl's upside down, you ain't going to get anything, are you? Right? Does that make sense? You can see how that works, right? Second one, even though you've got the right way up and the water collects in it, the vessel's dirty, so then the water's going to get polluted. So that's another fault we're going to abandon. And then the third one is even though it's clean and it's the right way up, it's got a leak. So eventually all the water that you're collecting, which is clean and beautiful, is just going to fall away anyway, right? So how does that work with the analogy? Let's look. So being upside down is by not taking things in or not paying attention, being distracted. Yeah. So I remember, when I was at the monastery in France listening to teachings, we spent a lot of time preparing the mind for teaching. So we do prayers at the beginning. Sometimes they would last like 15, 20 minutes. That's nothing compared to what they used to do in Tibetan monasteries. But, for us, that was quite a trauma. 15, 20 minutes before we started even. To kind of get the mind in the right frame so that we were then, the mind wasn't scatting about. It hadn't got too many distractions, etc., and it could focus on what was going to be said. Perhaps even a bit of silent meditation, so you can bring the mind to a point and kind of bring it somewhere still for a little while, so you kind of get it in that frame, that kind of zone, if you like. And there was other little things that our teachers used to say, like I used to remember that sometimes you just want to put your elbows on the table and rest your head in your hands and things like that. I used to do that all the time, and the teacher used to say, "Don't put your elbows on the table." So it shows that you were kind of like falling asleep. It's almost like that, very quickly you could like that. So it was all about training the mind to be the right way up, if you like, to be able to be a suitable vessel, to be able to receive the teachings. So it's quite obvious, isn't it? If we're distracted, it's just common sense, right? If we're distracted and we're thinking about other things, then we're not going to take it in. We won't remember it because we're not even listening, right? So it's like the rain just falling on a bowl that's upside down. So even if we're listening, then it could be that we're listening with a bad motivation, or we kind of draw some very wrong conclusions very quickly without thinking about it too much. So then the vessel is polluting what's coming into it. So it could be, for example, that you're listening to a teacher, but you're really kind of just thinking, who is this guy? I don't really believe what he's saying. I'm going to go, but I'm not really going to take anything he says seriously. I don't really trust him. Or you're kind of already going with a preconceived idea of what you're going to get from it, rather than perhaps having an open mind, thinking, okay, I'm going to listen and I'm going to see what he says or she says, right? But if you go with a really bad motivation and bad intention, then the chances are that what you're listening to isn't going to get through cleanly. Does that make sense? Or as it says in the text here, be polluted by misunderstanding. So that's like the water's falling into the bowl, but it's getting polluted by the bowl being dirty, right? Even if all that happens, you've got a clean bowl, it's the right way up, so you're listening attentively, you're great motivation. If we then don't do something to keep it in mind, we'll just forget it, like the leak. So then even though that work will have been wasted because we'll have forgotten, right? Thankfully, our teachers do keep repeating things for us, but it's in our own benefits to kind of make sure that doesn't get lost. So when I was in the monastery, I asked, or one of us asked, I can't remember what that actually means. What does that mean in practice? It means you have to take notes and you revisit the topics again and again. So you hear information once, and that's great, but you need to come back to it a few times for it to kind of sink in and not get lost. So you remember it. Ideally, meditate and retreat or debate. Debate is a fantastic way to memorize things and keep them in mind because but we don't have that tradition, so we discuss instead. But does that make sense? So you know this already from learning what stays in the mind and what goes quickly. So it's like a whole process. Whatever quality or value you put into this information from the beginning determines how long it's going to stay in the mind, if it's going to be unpolluted, etc. And how well you take care of this information that we get from the Dharma. It really has an effect on where we remember it. And it's important to remember because we get input from all kinds of random sources, 24/7, from TV, Facebook, etc. That is other people's information, and that can they do really well at, these algorithms are so clever that they'll kind of tie us into learning things very quickly about this product is great, or I should do this, or I should do that. So if we're not taking control of what's valuable for us, it can be out of our control. Yeah. So it's a very nice analogy, that one. Yeah. So something that comes up in the sutras a lot then is these three words: listen well, thoroughly, and hold it in mind. So listening well, that's counteract the fault of being upside down, not paying attention at all. Listen thoroughly, that's listening with an open mind, it's not polluted, it has a good motivation. And then hold it in mind is doing that work afterwards, to that study, note-taking, etc., to revisit the information and keep it there. This is how we subdue the mind, right? Does that all make sense? Any questions on that? How to listen, abandoning 3/4 of a vessel, 3/4 of a teacup, what do you want to say if we're in Yorkshire? Oh, some of us are not in Yorkshire, are we? No. So here's another preliminary meditation. I'm going to skip through some of these quite quickly now because these are actually modules already in the Discovering Buddhism, and the point of this module is just to get a broad overview of the path, which you can then do some study later. So one of the next ones is how to correctly rely on a spiritual teacher. And here I've just put down the outlines as we find them in the Lamrim Chenmo by Tsongkhapa, the Great Lamrim. The Foundation of the Path, this one is called. If you remember, in the Foundation of All Good Qualities, the very first verse is the foundation of all good qualities is the kind and perfect pure guru or lama or teacher, same, right? So this topic of guru devotion or lama devotion or taking on a teacher, etc., can be quite complex for us in the West. So we have to do some study and some background on that one. Can't just fly into it like, a dog following a food, just following food. As soon as a dog has food put in front of it, it's kind of wolfing it down, right? We can't be like that with the Dharma teacher. We have to assess the information carefully because this is of great importance to us. There's a book by Lama Zopa, I'm just looking at my shelf, a book by Lama Zopa called The Heart of the Path, if you're interested in learning more about that. But we'll come to that when we do the module on that, which is next, I believe, actually, isn't it? Does anyone know? I think it's the next module after this one. So we'll be doing that in a month's time. So we'll leave that for now. The next one is the precious human rebirth. Have you heard of the precious human rebirth? You've all got one, probably. It's not just a human rebirth, but it's a precious human rebirth. And not all human rebirths are precious, according to this system, right? According to very specific criteria, which are the 8 freedoms and 10 endowments, which is listed here, right? So we have to identify what those 8 are and 10 are, so we can determine why not everyone has one. And that's an important topic. Now, this is important. This is leading us into this aspiration of the small scope being. So first of all, you realize how fantastic, and how precious and how rare this human life that you have is. The difficulty it took to find it, all the causes you had to create to get it, weren't by chance. And it's not just, insignificant. It has great importance because on the basis of this human life, you can generate all the minds to enlightenment. It doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to get it from anywhere else. You have it all with you right now. This mind you have is just phenomenally, powerful, expansive, wise, caring. We just have to tap into the right, meditations, and get rid of the pollution that's stopping it, get rid of the weeds that's stopping the flowers to grow, right? So once you realize that, you're very excited. This is one of the uplifting meditations in the Lam Rim. Kind of inspires you, propels you to take care of your spiritual path, right? PHR, that's the jargon, the Buddhist jargon there for precious human rebirth. What are some of these 8 freedoms and endowments? So the 8 freedoms is like looking at it from the negative angle. You have free from being born as an animal, born as a hell being, born as a hungry ghost, and there's 3 lower realms. You are born free from those. You're born free from certain states that would stop you practicing Dharma. So there's 8 freedoms, or freedoms from states the way you couldn't practice Buddhism. You couldn't practice the spiritual path, Dharma, right? So you've got freedom from all those states. And then the 10 endowments are things that you have. You're born human. You're born in a central space. You have all the faculties. You weren't born with a severe learning disability, etc. You were born with all your limbs intact. You're born at a time when the Buddha was born. You're born at a time when the Buddha taught. You're born at a time when the teachings remain. You're born at a time when Dharma is being supported by sponsors, etc., so that you can receive teachings. You're born with all these fantastic circumstances. If just one of those is missing, or if you're missing, chance of you meeting and using the Dharma are, either reduced or non-existent. So that's a fantastic meditation to do, really important one. On the other hand, the very next meditation you do is that, you could lose at any point. So those two kind of go together. That's something we have to kind of get in our mind with the Lam Rim. They're very cleverly linked. Very clever psychological steps that a teacher put together. So you realize you've got something really precious, but at any moment, bam, it could be gone and you're into the next life. Yeah. So those two together are really powerful, right? So here's the beginning of the small scope, remembering death. And then after death, we could find ourselves in lower realms, which we don't want. So then how we get out of that is by taking refuge, generating some understanding of karma, and then putting karma into practice. So let's look at those in detail. So remembering death. There's a whole module on DB about remembering death. So we're going to come to that. This is just a brief introduction. But essentially, what's happening here is it's not about death itself that we're going to remember. Yeah. So don't get depressed. I mean, it is a sobering meditation for sure, but it's not about feeling frightened or scared about the time of death itself. What it's feeling concerned about is what happens after, because death from a Buddhist point of view is just a transition period. Yeah, that's what we have to remember when we hear death in the Buddhist context. It's just about transition. It's not about an end or a stopping. It's more like a movement from one state to another. We have to get that in our minds because, culturally, we tend to think of death as the end and disappearing and going to non-existence. Or, I'm not sure culturally where you are with that one, but Do you get my point? So from a Buddhist point of view, death is just a moving on. But the moving on is really dangerous because we don't know where we're going to go next if we haven't prepared. And that is the crucial point in this meditation. We don't know where we're going to go next. That uncertainty is the why we need to remember death, because as we look in the next meditation, we could go somewhere worse off right now. We could end up without freedoms and endowments. So we couldn't practice Dharma. And that would be a disaster, because we need to progress on a series of the same level over many lives to make some progress. It's all, accumulates. And if we have a point where we kind of fall from that, we might lose progress. We might take us ages to get back. Yep. So it's just practical information, really, the Buddha's giving us, just, to keep us on the road. And it's true, nobody can deny that we are going to die, right? Remember, we are going to transfer to another life. Whether we can take that step or not, I don't know. But, when someone says that, you have to be careful you hear it in the right way from a Buddhist point of view. So you are going to transfer to another life, for sure, absolutely certain. Nobody can remain, right? Not even the Buddhas, nobody. And the time of that is absolutely unknown to us. When that transference happens, that movement from this life to the next life, the mind leaves the body and moves on, we don't know when. Well, at least I don't know when. Apparently some people can tell, that is a realization that you can have if you're spiritually advanced, But for us beginners, we're just relying on, well, we can't rely on anything really, can we? Because we know that young people die before old people. Healthy people die before sick people. Celebrities and famous people, they die. Queens and kings, they die. Ordinary people on the street, the homeless, or lonely, it doesn't matter where you are, how much money you have, what possessions you have, we're all going to go through this transition period, and we don't know when. So to prepare is really important. If those two facts are true, then we have to prepare, right? So that's the crucial thing about this meditation. Yeah, well, that's an important one for us beginners to think about. And, as I'll quote His Holiness at the end there, the point is to take the essence of this life and make it really meaningful. It's not to scare us. We need to have a concern or, a healthy fear of what comes next, so we'll prepare. It's like having a healthy fear of your retirement. You might not call it fear, If you worry about your retirement, then you want to prepare. That's all it is, preparing for retirement. But you won't go on holiday, just jump in the car, get to the airport, and then realize you haven't prepared anything. You haven't booked a hotel, you haven't booked a flight, you haven't got your passport with you, you haven't got any jabs, you haven't got any. In the old days when we used to go on holiday, right? It'd be bizarre, right? So we're just being told to prepare here. Because next life, we could go to the lower realms. Lower realms are a little bit scary for us, perhaps, to think about. But the Buddha identified that these realms, if you like, were places where sentient beings are going to experience the results of their karma. It's not that there is a place, where there's like a devil waiting, saying, "Aha, I'm waiting for you." As Lama Yeshe famously says, "No, I'm waiting for you, Tupten Yeshe." Ha, ha, ha. It's the manifestations of people's karma. So we can already understand, that, how I thought about this when I did some retreat was, just not very far from where I'm sitting here in the city of Leeds. If I kind of go out 30 or 40 miles, there'll be some abattoir somewhere killing animals. And those animals will be going through extreme pain right this second. Because we eat a lot of meat, don't we, generally around the planet, right? So we have to kill and slaughter a lot of animals, and they're not always kept in the best way. So right now, there's going to be animals experiencing that. And that is quite a hellish, painful experience for those animals at that time, right? So I thought, well, for sentient beings to experience that much suffering in just a few miles from me, it's not a big extension to think that other people experience suffering in other realms. So these are not just states of mind, these are actually places you can be born. That's important to say. So if it's possible we could be born in those realms, spiritual practice would be finished for the time being. It would take us a long time to get back. Yeah. So with those two, sorry, somebody must say something.
It's just Maggie. Can I just ask how you would get back then if you're in that terrible place?
Yeah.
How would you develop, how would you create karma that will enable you to move up or out?
What do you think?
What do I think? How do I think that would happen?
Yeah, how would it be possible?
Because you wouldn't have the mindfulness, you wouldn't have the mindset of practicing Dharma, would you, if you are?
No, so not. You couldn't meditate, could you, really?
No.
Live a mind, listen to any Dharma. Well, the animals can't. We don't know about the other realms so much, but the animals can't listen to Dharma, understand anything. They're completely stupid.
So would you be relying on past karma that came before this karma that sent you to here?
That's one of the things I've heard when this question's come up, is that you have to wait till your negative karma to be born that period is exhausted.
Right.
Nothing's forever, right?
No.
Okay. So it's like your fuel to be born in that space would eventually run out. And then some positive karma, hopefully, that you created in the past would then ripen. If we have animals, for example, one of the best things we can do is stop them creating negative karma. Maybe blow some mantras in their ear, create some positive imprints in their mind, so that when they pass away, past this transition, they might be then, some of that might ripen and they get human rebirth.
Wow.
Yep.
Don't you think also, though, that in some cases, compassion can be shown? But I mean, I've seen it between animals. I had two little Jerseys, and the one used to really care for the other.
Yeah,
absolutely. And so there is care and care. So I suppose you could generate it in that way, couldn't you? In certain circumstances.
Well, let's think about this, because from a Buddhist point of view, to create, to be born as a human next life, you have to be thinking about non-harming others intentionally. We none of us are harming, grossly as we go about our daily life, but for it to be strong enough karma to ripen as a human rebirth, there has to be something pretty powerful. Like, there has to be a situation where you find yourself about to kill and you restrain yourself because you understand the teachings and you move by something you then engage it. Now, can you stop a cat from killing a mouse, for example, because you tell it he's not going to get a precious human rebirth next? No chance, right? They're hardwired, that in that situation, that rebirth, the hardware they find themselves with, the body, the brain in that situation, can't let them think, about bigger situations. So there is
Isn't there a story of isn't there a story of Buddha Shakyamuni when he was in the hell realms, that he was pulling a chariot or something?
So
do you know
there
that
are
story,
stories like that, and whether they're true or not, I'm not so sure. You have to check. But there are some stories around where, I'm sure it's true that lamas can go to these different realms and help sentient beings, for sure. I mean, they're here helping the human realms. The best way is to get them in the human realm and then teach. So they'll drag them out of the lower realms as best they can. And then when at the right time, then they teach. And that's how we get on the spiritual path. But to get them out of those lower realms, I don't know how they do it. It'd have to be quite magical. But it's very difficult. And we might get missed, because most sentient beings find themselves in the lower realms. It means look at how many animals there are compared to humans on this planet. 7 billion humans, right? How many billions animals? Just in like 1 square mile of, Earth or the sea, just unimaginable. So most of the sentient beings are in the lower realms. So we have to get enlightened quick, right? But anyway, the point of this small scope is to make sure that we take care of ourselves first and get ourselves on a level so we don't fall back, so we can progress. That's the point, right? So then what that leads you to is the practices of the small scope being, which is refuge and karma, and abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions, which is putting karma into practice. So you generate the aspiration to work for future lives by thinking you've got something really precious. You can lose it any minute. Definitely you can lose it, but you don't know when. And you could go to the lower realms. So then you kind of panic a bit and think, okay, I've got to make sure I have a series of human lives next. So therefore you take refuge which means, you know, you're putting these practices into, putting your money where your mouth is, you know, engaging in the spiritual path seriously, following advice, generating these positive minds, and abandoning non-virtuous actions such as killing, stealing, lying, etc. And that's the first step. The Buddhist said, at least get hold of that so you can get human life. Keep yourself on the path of human life. Then we'll work out the next stage later. Just get a grasp on that. That's the small scopes. That's the small scopes mind, right? So here's what it says in the Lamrim Chenmo about the attitude of a person of small capacity. Previously, you had an uncontrived interest in this life, whilst your interest in future lives has merely been an understanding that follows what others say. When these change places and your interest in future lives has become paramount, while your interest in this life has become merely incidental, then, you know, you've generated the attitude of a person of small capacity. Got some time to take that in. So at the moment, we mainly work for right now, and we barely think about future lives. But what we, the small scope will do for this person is that'll change. They'll mainly be thinking about future lives, while this life's, you know, prosperity and wealth and interest will become, you know, if I've got time, maybe I'll think about that. But, you know, the main thing is how to prepare. So, you know, the very first step then of the Lamrim is already, you know, thinking about future lives more than this life. That's only the small scope. Now, what this, it doesn't mean that we have to, you know, ignore being healthy in this life, for example. It doesn't mean that we have to ignore people that we meet in this life. It doesn't mean that we can't enjoy a glass of wine and a nice, you know, meal. It doesn't mean that, you know, we shouldn't enjoy some things like nice chocolate or watch a TV program. It's just that you have to, as Lama Yeshua said, you have to understand that those things are just temporary happiness and they can't bring you real long-lasting happiness. You can have those things, of course, but you're not working for them primarily. Primarily, you're working for somewhere else, but you'll get those things, you know, those happinesses anyway. But it doesn't matter if you have them or not. You don't really care, do you? Because you're planning to maintain your series of future lives. I'll come back to that one. Sorry. Yeah. So just to recap then, preliminary meditations about how to listen to and explain. Then we looked at the spiritual teacher, and then the precious human rebirth. And then the beginning of the small scope was to try and think about future lives. So how do we think about future lives at all? First of all, you have to remember that you are going to definitely go to a future life, which is death. You have to get that clear first, and you don't know when it's going to happen, and you could go to the lower realms. So those thoughts lead you to then think immediately of, what do I do next? What do I do for next life? Psychologically speaking, that will lead you in that direction. Very clear, right? The Buddha was very clever. It sounds a bit of an insult almost to say that, really, to an enlightened being, but you know what I mean, right? Do you get my point there? So those, if that's clear to you, then you understand, you know, you understand what the Lamrim is doing in those first meditations. It's preparing us to think about, to even think about future lives, because we don't think about it, right? So we need to even generate the wish to think about future lives. So how the Buddha does that is he explains. Sorry, someone just joined us. Hi, Colm.
Hello, hi. Sorry,
hi.
I'm late. Sorry, I'm late. I don't mean to.
No problem. You're very welcome. I'm just going to, if you just pop yourself on mute while we go through, if that's okay. Thank you. You're very welcome. Nice to have you with us. So to even think about future lives, the Buddha doesn't assume we're going to just be able to do it like he says. It's one thing I really appreciate about Buddha's teachings. You know, I think I mentioned this before. You know, I'm not criticizing, but other traditions that I've noticed, they'll just say, you know, do this, you know, think about this. But with Buddha, he's really clever because he'll tell you how He wants to assume that you think about future lives to tell you this is how you do it, you know. He doesn't leave any stone unturned. He's really thought of everything and helping us on every step of the way. So how we do that is we have to remember that we are going to die. We don't know when it's going to be, and we could go to lower realms. So therefore, bam, okay, now I'm in the space where I'm going to think about the transition period between this life and next life. And then how you get a precious human rebirth, you know, is that you then abandon the 10 non-virtuous actions. Comes down to that one. Those are the actual causes. But you won't be interested in creating the causes unless you're thinking about it, right? So what most people of us on this planet right now are doing, humans, is we're just focused on money. We're just focused on relationships. We're just focused on power. We're just focused on people praising us. We're just focused on, you know, getting attention for whatever. You know, it makes me cringe when I see some of my friends, you know, on Instagram posting pictures of themselves on beaches and just looking at themselves nonstop. But this is the generation now, the Insta generation, constantly posting pictures of themselves so that they'll get likes or they'll get, you know, comments about how great you're looking. You know, that's their life. You know, this is all they think about right now: being liked, being praised, not wanting to be criticized, you know, avoiding at all costs anything that would make you look bad. But, you know, it'll be gone like that. And then what? They'll be left with nothing in the next life. So, you know, to concentrate on just those things right now, here and now, which is what most people do, is really short-sighted because it doesn't leave anything next to go next. Yeah. And everyone goes to the next life. Everyone at some point will go. And if you haven't got any investment there ready, then what? Then you'll go to the lower realms because you haven't got any investment. And not to mention the fact it's painful, it's just your spiritual path will be stopped. Yeah. So these meditations are the small scope to get us onto that level, to move us into thinking about the future and to prepare. It's not even thinking about anyone else at this point. It's not even thinking about the lower realms from a compassion point of view. That comes in the great scope. We're still at the selfish point of view in some ways here. We have to get an understanding of how we exist first before we can then extrapolate that to others. We're getting ourselves sorted first. Otherwise, like the blind leading the blind, you must sort yourself out first. So here then is our discussion points for today. Do you agree that a teacher is the foundation of the path? That could be a question for this week. Or you could choose to look at, what do you think about past and future lives? As I said at the beginning of this course, you know, these are just the Buddha's, what the Buddha found. He didn't create these ideas. The Buddha found these ideas and he explained these, what exists and what doesn't exist, etc. But we shouldn't just take it because the Buddha says. The Buddha himself said, don't just believe it because I say. So we have to understand what level we're at right now with these topics. That's really important. And hopefully we'll have an open mind to at least think about some of these things that the Buddha is saying might be true, might not, but I'm going to investigate. Yeah. But it's important to acknowledge that, because if we just believe it because someone says it's unstable and it won't last, as soon as someone more charismatic comes along, or someone has a nice top 10, you know, New York Times bestseller, we'll be on that view instead, right? So don't just believe something because we're told it. As intellectual laziness, we've got to make sure we don't fall into that trap. Don't just believe it because someone's got a best-selling book or wears a white coat and a clipboard. You have to investigate. Yep. So that's why I put this question here. Where are you with this idea about past and future lives? All right, so I'm going to stop the presentation and split it into groups. I'm going to stop the recording also here. Recording, share the slides. So this is just a recap what we covered then. So we covered these outlines, the preliminary meditations, how to listen to and explain the teachings, that looking at the abandoning 3 fourths of a vessel, correctly relying on spiritual teachers, how we do that, precious human rebirth. These are all modules that'll come later on in the course. Small scope, this is what we looked at mainly today. Generating the aspiration to even think about future lives, how we kind of get into that track of remembering that at some point we are going to transition from this to the next. You know, that's the point of remembering death and where we go next, and to maintain a level of a base on which we can then practice a spiritual path, we need to have a human life. You know, if we're born as an animal, we're not going to be able to progress. We're not going to be able to listen and understand and practice and meditate. So we need to have this human life again, a precious human rebirth again. So we do that by abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions, by not killing, not stealing, and the positive karma that comes from actively, you know, preserving life and helping others and telling the truth and looking after and not harming others creates, you know, hopefully it'll create enough positive force for us then to be born as a human. And not only that, there were different ways karma ripens. That's in the whole module of DB, different ways. The experiences we have within this life are also dependent on our actions. And if we find ourselves with a human life, but you know, it's full of, you know, intense pain and sickness, or we don't last very long, you know, then, you know, it kind of, its value is lessened because of the experiences in that life. So that's also coming from positive actions that we do. Likewise, you know, we could be born as an animal, which is considered negative from a spiritual point of view because you can't progress, but you could have some very positive things ripen in that life as an animal. You could be born to somebody who's very kind and gives you all the food and all the comfort and all the shelter you need, so you have a very comfortable life. So karma ripens in different ways. That's something we have to think about when we study. Here's something from the Dalai Lama to finish with. His Holiness is talking about a visit. Years ago, I visited Thailand, where many monasteries have a skeleton near the meditation hall. One monastery had a display with photographs of the stages of a rotting corpse. Seeing these reminded me that I too will die, and keeping that vividly in my mind spurs me to transform my mind. So it's very important, you know, part of a spiritual path is to remember that we don't have long, and we need to use what we have got meaningfully. You know, as we, you know, we should know by now, of course, all the pandemic, you know, and people dying left, right, and center around us. But still, you know, we have this idea that, you know, actually, I'm going to live till about 80 or so, 90. We don't know, right? So to get the most, it's not supposed to be a frightening in its sense. It's supposed to be like sobering in the fact that you will then take the essence of making this life really helpful for yourself and for others. I know that's the important point here. Let's finish with a meditation then together. So we're just going to use this verse as a kind of a base for our dedication. So we just find a position where you can meditate for a few moments. So we're not the same person as when we started an hour ago. We've thought lots of different positive thoughts. We've created lots of positive seeds in our minds. And the stronger our motivation at the beginning was, you know, then the stronger those seeds will be. So we planted, you know, to use the garden analogy, we planted very beautiful flowers. So we want these to ripen as happiness for ourselves and for others. So we dedicate that these seeds, these positive karmas that we created, may they ripen as happiness for ourselves and for others. May they ripen as our understandings of all the spiritual path. May they ripen as the quick, you know, release from suffering of the pandemic from this planet and all those affected in various corners of the globe. And more than that, may it ripen as our full enlightenment for all living beings. May we fully realize our spiritual peak of evolution, if you like, spiritual evolution, so that we can be the best help for others, the best support. Because the beings do need our help, right? So we also dedicate for the long and healthy life of our guides, people who explain this information to us, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So I'm just going to recite this verse in Tibetan, and you can join me if you like, or just think of your own dedication. Chanchu Sancho Rinpoche Pa Ke Pa Nama Ke Gyuji Gewanyam pame payam Gone gondu pewasho. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Gary. Have you?
Next week we should be doing more on the. I remember it'll be middle scope next week. Week after that, great scope, and then the summary to finish. So, week 4.
Have you,
same time?
Gary? Have you covered the prayer that needs to be learnt off by heart?
Yeah. So if you're doing this as the completion card module, then I think I did it last week. I explained last week that it'd be good to look at the foundation of all good qualities, and I put that in the Slack channel or emailed it to you if you asked. That's the one I would recommend you learn from memory.
Okay.
Yep. If you want any of this information, like the prayers, the outlines, just send me an email via smile@gemangleads.co.uk or put a message in Slack if you've got that, and then I'll send it to you. This will be on YouTube a little bit later. Otherwise, have a great evening, and I will see you hopefully at Vajrasattva practice in about 15 minutes. Bye now. See you later.
Bye bye.
Bye,
Thank you all.